Welcome back to the podcast history of our world. Chapter 4. The Stone Age. Early AMH people produced some amazing technological achievements in a relatively short amount of time. The bow and arrow was developed around 30 to 25,000 years ago, the net between 29,000 and 22,000, and the fish hook around 23,000 BC. Improvements in stone flaking enabled razor-sharp spears, as well as flint choppers, scrapers, knives, axes, and all sorts of better ways to maim, kill, slice, and butcher. Ugh. Doesn't it feel like everything they make has to be so violent? There is evidence of ropes, cord, and early weave baskets imprinted onto clay from around 28,000 years ago, but the organic remains have long since rotted away. Now, if we're presuming our earliest ancestors operated in traditional hunter-gatherer societies with those traditional gender roles, we can therefore discern the identity of who invented these tools. Case in point, what use does a hunter have for a big woven cord basket? Not much, but to those harvesting wild fruits, berries, and vegetables, it would make a huge difference. Women had their own technological achievements, no less important than men. But since these were typically made of organic materials that decompose, they're often overlooked. There is, however, one achievement of monumental merit and worth, one that may have very well saved civilization as we know it. But you'll have to download the next episode to find it out. Meanwhile, there's another situation with Homo sapiens that bears mentioning, and it concerns the interaction with Canis lupus, the wolf. Picture a group of people sitting around a campfire, cooking up whatever their latest hunt was. Now imagine the smoky aroma was just too much for some brave or possibly hungry wolf who cautiously approaches the group. Maybe the people chase it off at first, but maybe it came back, and eventually someone from the group maybe tosses a piece of food to the wolf, who eats it up and doesn't leave. In fact, it seems to get closer, but without any sign of aggression. Now picture other wolves seeing what's going on and learning that if you hang around these humans and don't bite them, you get free meat. And these friendlier wolves form their own packs and hang around the outskirts of the camp, and then they have puppies, and people learn to favor and raise the friendliest and most social of these wolf puppies, selectively breeding them to create even friendlier and more loyal offspring until between 30,000 BC and 15,000 BC, Canis lupus familiaris appears. The dog, mankind's oldest and bestest friend. I know it seems tough to think that in only 15,000 years, you can take a wild animal that would normally eat you and turn it into Fido. But it's very much possible. Researchers in Russia did the very same thing using foxes, and in far less time. They took the ones that displayed lower levels of aggression and were most tolerant to people, and within 10 generations had bred foxes that displayed classic dog-like tendencies, like tail wagging, licking, jumping, and barking. Adorable. The transformation from wolf to dog represents the very first time people took an active role in becoming much more than just another animal on this earth. We had taken another species, severed the ties of natural selection, and created something that suited our needs even better. Now we've got four-legged friends that gladly work for, basically scraps. These early dogs were bred for strength and work. The cute lap dogs that do nothing except be precious widow snuggums don't arrive until the development of royal society, starting in China actually, where some of the oldest breeds in the world come from, like the Pekingese and the Shih Tzu. Mankind's earliest dogs didn't have those luxuries, but they were just as valued for their tracking skills, assistance during hunts, barking at intruders, and just simply for companionship. And, it should be mentioned that there's one other thing dogs can be used for. Yeah, it's food. Nowadays, most of the world doesn't eat dog, and they actually have laws against it. Even some religions specifically state it's a sin. Kosher, halal, and some Buddhist dietary laws all strictly state this. But many cultures throughout history did eat dog meat in times of lean and plenty. The Koreas and China are typically unfairly singled out for this, and while it does still happen, it's less and less popular nowadays. In Europe, dog was eaten in Germany during tough times and called blockade mutton, while in Switzerland, there's a traditional recipe for Hundfleisch, thin slices of smoked dog ham. And if you really want a culture that loved their dog meat, head on over to the Aztecs. With few sources of animal protein, dog, specifically something related to the Mexican hairless dog, or Xoloitzcuintli, was routinely on the menu. So now it's 30,000 BC, and in the midst of all of humanity's accomplishments, something has happened to our Neanderthal cousins. They're dead, all of them. Numerous theories abound as to what happened here, ranging from climate change, dietary problems, and genetic defects, but two theories tend to stand out. The first is the genocide theory. As the territory of Homo sapiens and Neanderthalensis got closer to each other, war became inevitable. And as strong and advanced as the Neanderthals were, Homo sapiens were better. Plus, their higher numbers and advanced brain power also meant coordinating attacks much more effectively. So they wiped them out. The other theory involves interbreeding, one that was disputed seemingly forever, although now there appears to be a bit of backtracking. Basically, it goes like this. The Neanderthals didn't die out. They just married into our big happy human family. Earliest estimates for this begin at about 50,000 years ago, and recent DNA sequencing on the remains of a 45,000-year-old AMH from Siberia called the Ust-Ishim man shows conclusive evidence of Neanderthal DNA clusters. The fragmented nature of his DNA also indicates that his Neanderthal ancestors came way before him, thus ruling out this being a recent fluke. In fact, scientists are now saying that anyone with Eurasian ancestry probably has a tiny percentage of Neanderthal DNA in them, maybe 1 to 4%. So I mean, the evidence is looking good. But let me remind all those of us with that Eurasian ancestry that we are not hybrids. Our ancestors did not merge species, just some of them successfully interbred. And I say successfully because normally when you take two very similar species and breed them, the new species is born sterile, unable to procreate on its own. Take a donkey and a horse and you get a mule, sterile. Take a lion and a tiger and you get a liger, sterile. Take a chimp and a human and you get a human Z? Look it up. It hasn't been done yet, and the ethical ramifications ensure it never will. But I hear Carl Pilkington has some research on the topic, and he's always good for an academic review. Regardless of how Neanderthal man became extinct, they did, and the only other human species on this earth died out. And that's a fact I want to repeat about Neanderthals. They were human. A totally separate human race from our own. It's like something you'd find in a Tolkien novel with hobbits and elves. Can you imagine a world with another sentient species? That would fundamentally change so much about who we are. It's pretty heavy stuff. Well, for now at least, Homo sapiens, mankind, us, are now supreme. All the genetic dead ends like Australopithecus and Paranthropus have failed, and their hairy vegetarian ways will no longer impede our destiny to rule the world. Who amongst them had our superior intellect, that ability to change, a resilient and dogged perseverance against any obstacle in our path, the means to a glorious future await, built on a foundation of hard work? Can you dig it? It sounds great. Oh, really, it does. But, it is a gorgeous day outside, you know? Thinking about hitting the beach later. You know, it's oyster season, dude, and the eatin's good. Just gonna relax and think some deep thoughts. Like, hey, you ever wonder if you could, sing like a bird? I know, sounds crazy, right? Although... Okay, well, someone had the same thought, and this curious inventor discovered that drilling holes into a hollow bone and blowing through the opening created different tones, and the first flute is born. Conversely, others discovered that drilling holes into someone's head would produce different tones, for, obvious reasons. Trepanning, which either involves neatly removing a piece of skull bone or drilling a small hole into the skull, was performed to drive out evil spirits. The real culprits being migraines, epileptic seizures, and other maladies early man had no way of understanding. Numerous skulls have been found with small portions carefully removed, and with varying surgical success. Some skulls appear to have new bone growth near the hole, evidence the operation took well. Other skulls show signs that infection followed the procedure, which no doubt killed the patient. Well, hey, no more pain either way. But keep in mind, these surgeries were done with stone tools and no anesthetics as far as we can tell. Hope the patient has an ungodly tolerance for pain. While some of our ancestors were experimenting with brain surgery, some others were drawn back to the caves, this time bringing with them some ground-up charcoal or ochre mixed with spit or animal fat. And the very first artistic movement was born. Images of people and animals, but also abstract shapes and hands. These cave paintings have been discovered all over the world, with the oldest discovered so far in Spain at the cave of El Castillo, dating to about 40,000 BC. Prolific representations of animals like dogs and bison, as well as the red outlines of hands, dot this prehistoric Louvre. Similar cave paintings have also been found in France, like the famous Chauvet and Lascaux caves, and other sites in Spain, like Altamira and Cueva de la Pasiega. And while the European sites tend to get the most attention, there's a whole other world out there full of prehistoric artwork. The Bhimbetka rock shelters in Madhya Pradesh of India contain images of dancing, hunting, and other social scenes from about 30,000 BC. Cave paintings of stylized hunters in Namibia date to 25,000 BC. In Xinjiang, China, rock art of animals and hunters date to about 12,000, and in Argentina, at the appropriately named Cueva de los Manos, where countless stenciled hands adorn the walls, dated to around 10,000 BC. Australia deserves a special mention because the cave art in its northern territory depicts the giant emu-like bird Genyornis, which is thought to have died out about 40,000 years ago. Now, if that's really the creature depicted, then that would make these paintings at the very least 40,000 years old, and thus placing it as the reigning champion for world's oldest Stone Age painting. Unfortunately, because no organic material was used in the paint, scientists are unable to carbon date it. So for now, El Castillo holds the title, but for how much longer, I wonder? Okay, well, it's art. It's all nice and pretty, but is there anything that we can read into here? Clearly there's something happening to the human mind that allows for this level of creativity, but what does it mean? Some theories here. The first and simplest is the magic approach. That by depicting all these food animals, hunters will be blessed with an abundance of game. The magic theory also ties into the gateway theory, that these paintings were drawn by shamans who used them to communicate with the spiritual world. This could explain why the paintings tend to be deep within the caves, and why dangerous animals like rhinos, lions, and bears appear to be drawn in the most remote parts, because only the shaman has the power to confront the darkness and defend against otherworldly dangers. Another theory suggests that early mankind simply couldn't have the level of imagination we have today, and thus created these images to illustrate basic desires. In addition to 85% of depicted game animals being placed in the center of a painting, 80% of the female figures are as well, which may indicate a male artist here. Last among the theories, and we're kind of going out on a limb here, is that this art was produced from an artist with an altered state of mind. How else to explain the bizarre half-animal men and weird creatures that appear in some of these paintings? Or how some professors with storied academic backgrounds have argued that geometric shapes in these paintings really represent men and women. Triangles, ovals, and rectangles for the female shape, straight lines, barbed lines, and rows of dots for the male. Modern art, am I right? And while I suppose it's plausible that these prehistoric artists might have eaten some fermented fruit and went all strawberry alarm clock on these cave walls, I don't like this theory for the same reason I don't like any theory that takes power and ownership away from human achievement. It just doesn't sit right that all this could only be created by people not in control of their own actions. Now, aside from painted art, there is also the first sculpture art, in the iconic form of the Venus figurines. These were made of bone, clay, ivory, or stone, with the earliest dating back to around 35,000 BC. Typically, these female figurines are without facial features, and they show heavily exaggerated personalities, going for that steatopygian look. Basically, lots of junk in the trunk. These statuettes have been found mostly in Europe and Russia, but some late Jomon period works from Japan have also been discovered. Theories as to what the Venus figurines are fall into what I'm calling fertility versus fetish. I've posted a long list of various examples on my website, podcasthistoryofourworld.com, for you to peruse through. Maybe if I had David Attenborough describing the Venuses, it wouldn't sound so weird, but I know I'm just going to make it sound weird, so go to the website to look at them. Anyway, we start with the fertility theory, that these Venuses represent the mother goddess, full-figured, older, a symbol of abundance, prosperity, and life. Women could pray to these figurines for a successful childbirth, and men might pray to them for a prosperous hunt. And the fact that nearly all the Venuses are carved with their legs tight together and coming to a point suggests they might have been planted in the ground for worship, or later in agriculture, or could have even been worn as a charm around the neck. Fertility and reproduction matter to both men and women, and if you'll recall from the last episode, since the Toba explosion possibly wiped out so many of humanity's numbers, well, they need all the help they can get. The fetish theory, on the other hand, is just that. These figurines are prehistoric pornography. Historians tend to assume that the various sculptors of these works were men, because without access to high-speed internet, they made the Venuses for reasons. And yes, before you feel this theory is insensitive and degrading to, well, both genders really, these historians assume it's a male artist because many of the Venuses have a surprising amount of detail on certain anatomical parts, which again have been almost massively enlarged. Then again, there's nothing to definitively prove either one of these theories, although whoever made them definitely seemed to know what they were doing. In fact, an actual non-pervy theory here is that these are self-portraits, done by women for women to feel good about themselves. It's not a theory I buy into. Not that women weren't the sculptors, but because notions of gender dominance, this idea of a patriarchy, and societal concepts of beauty don't begin until the founding of the first cities. Without an ingrained system in place to enforce standards of how women should look, what's the point of these sculptures then? If you want my opinion on the Venuses, I believe they're symbolic of the mystery and respect women had in early society. Try to imagine how prehistoric men, not mankind but men, made sense of where babies came from. All Grok knows is that after about 9 cycles of a full moon, following that wonderful night out at the new cave art exhibit with the alluring Ugarella, and poof, a baby human. And if childbirth was anything like how it is in certain tribal societies today, it was done behind closed doors, with no men allowed to participate in and witness the messy secrets of life. Wife goes in, wife plus one comes out. Is it any wonder why men would be in such respectful awe of this power? Ultimately, our ancestors were not creating art just for art's sake. Yes, they were drawing horses and mammoths and sculpting Zaftig women, but they were also thinking abstractly. These were ideal forms, something a certain Greek philosopher would give words to thousands of years later. But if our ancestors understood higher concepts like that, then they must have been thinking about higher questions as well. Like, why is the sky blue? Where did we come from? What happens when we die? In looking for the answers to such profound questions, mankind will create religion, which we're not going to get into just yet. Oh, you know what though? We've approached our first arbitrary temporal milestone, 10,000 BC, the Holocene epoch, which we're currently still living in. The Ice Age is technically over, and the glaciers are melting, causing oceans to rise as well as sudden flash floods. Don't worry about the climate change part. Instead, let's see what everyone's up to around the world. Starting where it all began in Africa, cave and rock paintings appear in parts of Namibia, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. Much of the continent's people are hunter-gatherers. In Europe, people are spreading out fast, colonizing as far away as Randaberg, Norway. The Magdalenian culture in France is creating advanced works of art and tools unheard of at this time. In Southwest Asia, also known as the Middle East, the Natufian people are thought to have settled down near the Jordan River, laying the foundations for a famous city. In East Asia, the Jomon people of Japan are the first to create pottery, wrapping clay with cords. On the islands of Oceania, some of the most intrepid explorers known to humanity are crossing through the Pacific to start new settlements. In North America, the enigmatic Clovis culture are such successful hunters that many big mammals will go extinct soon. And in South America, there is evidence of people settling down in the Yucatan Peninsula. If it seems like my facts are kinda broad, it's because there isn't any recorded history happening at the year 10,000 BC. Now, there's plenty for archaeologists, but not so much for a riveting story. We'll need to jump at least about 2,000 years ahead to get to the next major point in our history. Oh, and because, why not? It's about this time that the advanced civilizations of Atlantis and Mu are supposed to have collapsed, when their island continents either exploded or sank. Which of course means the super advanced refugees spread across the world to jumpstart our still primitive ancestors, to found our earliest civilizations. You know, teach the Maya astronomical secrets, become the conquering Indo-Aryans, draw giant hummingbirds in Peru, something about crystal skulls, sunken Japanese pyramids. You know what? It all makes sense! Oh, just gotta adjust my tinfoil hat here, hang a few more coat hangers from the ceiling, and we're ready to move on. Well, anyway, mankind has founded settlements near sites that can support a pretty decent-sized tribe. The abundance of wild food at this time allowed for a leisurely lifestyle where more people were freed up from gathering sustenance, and allowed them to spend more time creating new tools and thinking up new ideas. It's this laid-back way of life that gave way to the loftier notion of no longer relying on nature to provide. What if humanity could control their own food supply? Whoa, that's a huge jump in thinking. And if I'm hearing this correctly, are you saying you want a revolution? Well, that's where we're going to pick it up next time, along with the big reveal for the prehistoric world's greatest invention, on the podcast history of our world.